Welcome and good evening. Tonight, we settle into the soft hush of small-town Missouri, where pastel homes line quiet streets and wind chimes stir gently in the summer air. This is the story of a mother and her daughter, inseparable, devoted, and to those who knew them, utterly extraordinary. The mother, Dee Dee Blanchard, was endlessly patient and kind. Her daughter, Gypsy Rose, was fragile, sweet, and always smiling despite the many illnesses she was said to carry. They were admired, supported, even celebrated. But behind their front door lived a quieter truth. There were no dramatic outbursts, no scenes of chaos, just routines, silence, control. And then, one summer evening, it all vanished. Dee Dee was found dead, Gypsy missing. The world watched in disbelief as the story unfolded, and what emerged was something far stranger and far sadder than anyone could have imagined. This isn't a tale of monsters. There are no sirens screaming through the night, no haunted house at the edge of town, just the slow unraveling of a life built on lies and a daughter's desperate wish for freedom. Tonight, we walk gently through the story of Gypsy Rose and Dee Dee Blanchard. A story told not for shock, but for understanding. So breathe deeply, let the quiet hold you, and drift with me into a tale where nothing is as it seems, and where the deepest wounds are those we cannot see. In a home trimmed with pink, under the soft glow of porch lanterns and surrounded by lush hedges, a mother and daughter once lived, alone, but never unseen. To the neighbors, they were a picture of resilience. A mother devoted to her sickly child. A girl confined to a wheelchair, pale and gentle, with a voice like a lullaby. They shared everything, their stories, their struggles, even their silence. The house on West Volunteer Way seemed touched by something saintly. Strangers stopped by to donate gifts. Doctors marveled at the mother's dedication. Television cameras occasionally rolled in, and the whispers of sympathy followed them everywhere they went. The mother was Dee Dee Blanchard, her daughter, Gypsy Rose. But beneath the careful brushstrokes of this perfect portrait, something far more unsettling had been quietly taking shape. There were no screams in the night, no alarms, no sirens. When the truth came, it did so in a single, startling message. A message that appeared suddenly on the shared Facebook page of mother and daughter. That buck is dead. Neighbors were confused, then frightened, then suspicious. Police arrived. The home, once buzzing with birthday parties and charity events, was now silent, eerily so. Dee Dee was found inside, no longer alive. Gypsy missing. It seemed impossible. This fragile girl in the wheelchair, this devoted mother. A tragedy, yes, but a crime? That didn't seem to fit. Not at first. But in time, a very different story emerged. One not of devotion, but of domination. Not of illness, but of illusion. And so tonight, as you settle into stillness, we will begin to slowly unspool the delicate threads of their story. It is one woven with whispered lies, quiet suffering, and the strange spaces where love turns into something else. Something possessive, something dangerous. You may have heard parts of this tale before, the headlines, the documentaries, the dramatizations. But here, we explore it gently, not for the thrill, not for the shock, but to understand, to drift with you through the sadness, the manipulation, and the long echo of control that haunted the life of Gypsy Rose. So breathe deeply. Let your shoulders drop. Let the quiet take hold. And come with me to the house at the end of the street, where a girl who couldn't walk was dreaming of escape, and a mother who gave everything had far too much to hide. There was something enchanting about the way Dee Dee Blanchard cared for her daughter. She was always attentive, always kind, her voice soft, her manner patient, even when she described the long list of challenges little Gypsy Rose faced each day. The world saw her as a mother warrior, battling every diagnosis with optimism and love, wearing her exhaustion like a badge of honor. And Gypsy? She was the brave, smiling child who bore it all with grace. Her thin frame rested quietly in a wheelchair, her head often covered with hats or scarves, and her eyes bright with a strange, serene acceptance. From the outside, theirs was a bond that defied hardship. Their story was one of devotion, of a mother's love tested time and again, and a daughter's unbreakable spirit. Dee Dee told doctors and neighbors alike that Gypsy had leukemia, that she had muscular dystrophy, that she had seizures, learning difficulties, vision and hearing impairments. A feeding tube sat beside her. Medications lined their shelves like soldiers in a never-ending war. She was allergic to sugar, couldn't eat by mouth, and was developmentally delayed. At least, that's what Dee Dee insisted. Charities rallied to their side. They received trips to Disney World, donations, a new home built by Habitat for Humanity, pink-roofed, wheelchair-accessible, complete with a jacuzzi tub for hydrotherapy. The community of Springfield, Missouri embraced them with open arms. Doctors deferred to Dee Dee's extensive knowledge of Gypsy's conditions. Her medical vocabulary was fluent. She kept meticulous notes. She told consistent stories. And for a time, no one questioned her. Gypsy's voice was high and childlike, and her behavior often matched. She clutched stuffed animals, wore prince costumes, and spoke with the innocent timbre of a girl far younger than her actual age. She was shy, obedient, always smiling. And Dee Dee hovered close, always. She filled out the forms. She answered the questions. She monitored every conversation. Gypsy often sat quietly, her eyes darting towards her mother, as if searching for permission before speaking. To the world, Dee Dee was the definition of a selfless mother. She had sacrificed everything, her own health, her freedom, her time, to care for a child with endless needs, and people praised her for it. What no one could see was how carefully constructed this image really was. There were cracks, faint but telling, in the story of the perfect pair. Moments when Gypsy said something that didn't align. Times when she stood unaided for a moment too long. Doctors who raised questions that quickly faded into silence. But these moments were brief, and Dee Dee was always there, with another explanation, another diagnosis, another page from the ever-growing file of Gypsy's supposed conditions. And so, the story held. Mother and daughter, suffering and strength, illness and sacrifice, a perfect mother, and her perfect child, for now. Illness had become the rhythm of Gypsy's life. From the time she was a toddler, doctor visits, tests, and procedures marked the seasons. Her medical chart, if stacked end to end, would read more like a novel than a patient record. And within its pages lived a strange truth, a cascade of symptoms that never quite added up. Asthma, sleep apnea, epilepsy, hearing loss, vision problems, heart murmurs, chromosomal defects, muscle diseases, brain damage from a premature birth, a feeding tube, a wheelchair. The list was long, too long. And yet, for years, no one pieced together the inconsistencies. No one seemed to notice how one diagnosis bled into another, how test results often came back inconclusive or normal, how medications were prescribed not because of clear medical evidence, but because of Dee Dee's persuasive recounting of symptoms. Gypsy's childhood became a carousel of clinics, hospital rooms, and white coats. She learned early how to sit still for tests, how to smile through the pain, how to answer politely when doctors asked questions, always glancing toward her mother for affirmation. When Gypsy was just 7 years old, Dee Dee claimed she had leukemia. Her head was shaved, not from chemotherapy, but by Dee Dee herself, to match the story. People believed it without question. After all, Gypsy looked the part, pale, frail, quiet. She wore oversized glasses and clutched plush toys to her chest. When she lost her baby teeth and they didn't grow back, Dee Dee said it was due to medication side effects. But the real reason was more unsettling. They had been removed intentionally by a dentist, based on Dee Dee's claims. As the years passed, so too did the diagnoses evolve. Dee Dee claimed that Gypsy had muscular dystrophy, requiring a wheelchair. She said Gypsy couldn't eat solid food and had to be fed through a tube, that she had seizures daily, even though hospital staff never observed them directly. And every time someone questioned the narrative, Dee Dee would switch doctors, change states, or adjust the diagnosis, just enough to keep the carousel spinning. Medical professionals, in hindsight, admitted they'd had doubts. A few raised concerns. One neurologist, Dr. Bernardo Flasterstein, grew suspicious and reached out to other providers. He suspected Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a form of abuse where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone else, often a child, to gain attention or sympathy. He wrote it in his report, but nothing happened. No follow-up, no investigation. Dee Dee always seemed to stay one step ahead. She claimed Gypsy's birth records had been destroyed during Hurricane Katrina. She presented a paper trail of diagnoses, prescriptions, and disability claims. She had answers for everything. And Gypsy, she believed most of it. Or at least, she wasn't sure what was true anymore. She had been told she was sick for as long as she could remember, told she couldn't run, couldn't eat normally, couldn't live like other children. She was taught to mistrust her own body, her own memory, her own sense of self. Gypsy once said that in the quietest parts of her mind, she wondered if something wasn't quite right. She noticed that she could move her legs, that she didn't feel sick, that food didn't always hurt her, but those thoughts came like faint ripples, and Dee Dee was always there to smooth the surface. Theirs was a carefully constructed reality, one where sickness wasn't the condition, but a way of life, where doctors were both saviors and pawns, where pity became currency, and where truth bent gently, endlessly beneath the weight of a mother's control. As Gypsy grew older, the line between reality and fiction blurred even further. Her legal age was hidden from her. Dee Dee kept her documents locked away and told her she was younger than she really was. When Gypsy turned 18, Dee Dee still claimed she was only 14. Illness had become identity, And without it, Gypsy had nothing. No school, no friends, no freedom. Only her mother. And so, the sickness continued. Not because of a failing body, but because of a failing truth. One constructed with care, maintained with lies, and defended with the quiet desperation of someone who feared being seen for what they really were. In time, the web would fray. But for now, Gypsy lived in a world where hospitals were familiar, pain was normal, and the thought of being healthy felt like the most dangerous idea of all. To understand the strange spell Dee Dee Blanchard cast over her daughter's life, one must first understand how quiet control can become a kind of air, invisible, but everywhere. Dee Dee didn't scream. She didn't shout. She didn't rage or flail. Her power came from her presence, from the gentle yet unyielding way she monitored every word, every movement, every breath Gypsy took, from the way her voice softened when others were around, and from how it sharpened when they weren't. She kept their world small, isolated, tidy. They had few visitors, no extended family nearby, and Dee Dee made sure that Gypsy's contact with others was brief, monitored, and purposeful. Teachers, nurses, even neighbors, all were filtered through Dee Dee's steady gaze. It was her way of ensuring no one got too close. No one asked too many questions. Inside the house, the atmosphere was subdued. The television stayed on often. The curtains remained drawn. And Gypsy's days revolved around her medications, her treatments, and endless hours of stillness. When Gypsy was a little girl, this routine may have felt like protection. But as the years slipped by, it became clear that the boundaries of her world were not fences of safety, but walls of control. Dee Dee controlled Gypsy's diet, her clothes, her hair. She decided when and how she could bathe. She managed her social media accounts. When Gypsy showed curiosity about boys or growing up, Dee Dee shut it down. Not with punishment, but with guilt, with sadness, with the unspoken threat of disappointment. "You know you're too sick to think about those things," she'd say. "You need your rest." And Gypsy would nod, swallowing the quiet ache of wanting more. There were moments, flashes of awareness, when Gypsy questioned her reality. She once snuck a bite of a cupcake, despite being told she was allergic to sugar. And nothing happened. She realized she could move her legs with ease when no one was watching. She began to wonder why certain medications made her feel worse, not better. But confronting these thoughts meant confronting the idea that her entire life had been built on a lie, and that her mother, the woman she trusted most, might not be who she seemed. That kind of realization doesn't come all at once. It arrives slowly, like fog pulling back from a field, piece by piece, until the shapes underneath begin to form. Strange, unfamiliar, unsettling. As Gypsy reached her teens, the cracks began to widen. She overheard conversations, noticed inconsistencies in her paperwork, and more than once, she caught Dee Dee lying to others, and perhaps more alarmingly, to her. Dee Dee's control tightened in response. When Gypsy was found browsing the internet alone, her mother took away the laptop. When she spoke too freely at a doctor's visit, Dee Dee squeezed her hand tightly, a subtle but unmistakable signal. At times, Gypsy was physically restrained, not by chains or locks, but by dependence. She couldn't drive, didn't know how to use money, had no real education, no private medical history, no ID. Her identity was not her own. It was the version Dee Dee had built for her, polished and curated and completely controlled. This was a different kind of prison, and it was lined with pink curtains and soft blankets. To the world, Dee Dee continued to play her part with skill. She raised money through charities. She gave interviews about her daughter's strength. She accepted donations with a grateful smile. She was the loving mother of a helpless child. A role that garnered praise, admiration, and most of all, attention. Munchausen syndrome by proxy, the condition many believe Dee Dee suffered from, isn't always dramatic. It doesn't always look like violence. Sometimes it looks like devotion, like care, like a parent who just wants the best for their child. But underneath that care is a desperate need for validation, for control, for sympathy. And the cost of that need is often paid by the child. Gypsy Rose, by her own later admission, had come to believe that her life was not her own. She felt like a puppet, a possession, something kept alive not for her own good, but for someone else's story. And as she approached adulthood, though she didn't know it yet, she was beginning to imagine what freedom might feel like. Not in grand, dramatic terms, but quietly, softly, the way you imagine the warmth of sunlight when you've lived too long in shadow. For much of her life, Gypsy Rose lived in a world where she was watched, managed and cared for, but never truly seen. The routines were strict, the story was rehearsed, and the boundaries, though velvet-lined, were rigid. But even the most delicate dollhouse can crack beneath quiet pressure. It began with questions, soft, tentative things that Gypsy held in the back of her mind like flickering candles. Why didn't she feel as sick as her mother said? Why did the doctors rarely confirm what Dee Dee told them? Why did Dee Dee hide her documents and hush her words? As Gypsy neared her late teens, though she still believed she was younger, thanks to Dee Dee's manipulation, her body was growing, her mind maturing. Curiosity, once something she feared, now returned with a quiet insistence. She wanted to learn. She wanted to speak. She wanted to understand. But most of all, she wanted to connect. At night, while Dee Dee slept beside her in their small house, Gypsy would take a secret laptop and log onto the internet. It was here, through the soft blue glow of a screen, that Gypsy began to feel the stirrings of autonomy. She watched fantasy films, read fan fiction, and soon she discovered online chat rooms. In those anonymous corners of the internet, Gypsy could pretend, not just to be healthy, but to be herself, or some version of it. She used a fake name. She described herself as normal, able-bodied, free. And in these small deceptions, she began to taste something she'd never had before: choice. It was through one of these chat rooms that she met Nicholas Godijon. He was quiet, awkward, interested in fantasy and cosplay, like she was, and he listened, truly listened, in a way she hadn't experienced. Their connection deepened quickly. They shared stories, secrets, dreams, and slowly their messages turned romantic. Gypsy, in her isolated world, clung to these exchanges like a lifeline. Here was someone who didn't know the version of her that Dee Dee had built, someone who saw her not as a patient or a victim, but as a person. Their relationship bloomed in secret. Months passed, then over a year, and soon the fantasy of escape, once too dangerous to imagine, began to feel like something real. Gypsy started to test her boundaries. She walked around the house when Dee Dee wasn't home. She skipped doses of medication. She questioned her supposed illnesses. And then, in 2011, she attended a science fiction convention in costume, dressed as Cinderella, with a friend she had met online. It was supposed to be a short outing. Dee Dee had reluctantly agreed, under strict supervision. But Gypsy vanished for several hours with a boy she'd met through the chat room. When she returned, Dee Dee was livid. She destroyed Gypsy's computer, smashed it with her hands, screamed, threatened to call the police, told her that if she ever tried to run again, the authorities would arrest her, put her in a group home, and no one would believe her. Then she tightened the leash. Gypsy was rarely left alone. Her medications increased. Her movement around the house became more restricted. She was told, again and again, that she was helpless, incapable, dependent. But it was too late. The walls had cracked. Gypsy now understood that there was another version of the world out there, one she hadn't yet touched, but could almost feel through the screen. And the more she thought about it, the more impossible her life with Dee Dee began to seem. In secret, she reconnected with Nicholas. They created alternate identities and shared fantasies, some romantic, some dark. He spoke of protecting her, of freeing her, of building a life together. She began to imagine what it might feel like to choose her own clothes, to walk unaided, to eat what she liked, to be called by her real age, to sleep without someone listening to her every breath. These thoughts no longer felt like fantasies. They felt like plans. And in the quiet hours of the night, Gypsy Rose, the girl the world believed couldn't walk, couldn't think for herself, couldn't survive, was beginning to inch towards something she had never dared to name: freedom. But freedom, when long denied, can take strange forms. And in Gypsy's case, that desire, that need, would lead to a decision that could never be undone. In the world that Gypsy Rose secretly built for herself online, Nicholas Godejohn appeared like a figure from a dream, albeit a slightly off-kilter one. He was kind, in a hesitant sort of way, polite, curious, a little shy. He loved fantasy stories, cosplay, and roleplay. His messages were long and emotional. His heart, it seemed, was worn plainly on his sleeve. And when he told Gypsy she was beautiful, even in the quiet hours when no one else had ever said so, she believed him. To Gypsy, Nicholas wasn't just a friend. He was a portal, a promise, a witness to her hidden self. Nicholas, for his part, had challenges of his own. Diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, he struggled in social settings and had difficulty regulating impulse control. His mental health records later revealed a complex blend of emotional needs and vulnerability. But in his conversations with Gypsy, he was gentle, protective, devoted. Their relationship quickly intensified. In private chat rooms and online threads, they created characters and fantasy worlds. Nicholas sometimes played the role of a dark, commanding protector, a figure Gypsy called Victor, while she crafted versions of herself that were free, feminine, and bold. It wasn't always light-hearted. Some of the messages grew darker, more intense. Fantasies of rescue became fantasies of vengeance. Gypsy confided in Nicholas about her mother, about the lies, the pain, the medications, the wheelchair, the control. She spoke, perhaps for the first time, with someone who didn't question her reality, and Nicholas believed her. He told her she didn't deserve to suffer. He promised that one day she would be safe. In 2015, after years of hiding their relationship, Gypsy made a bold decision. She and Nicholas arranged to meet in person, not as secret lovers, but as strangers by design. Gypsy convinced Dee Dee to take her to the local movie theatre, where Nicholas would coincidentally show up. He arrived carrying a red rose. Gypsy later recalled how surreal it felt to see him not on a screen, but beside her, a real person, breathing the same air. They sat together during the movie. He held her hand. At one point, she led him to the bathroom, where they shared their first physical connection. It was awkward, clumsy, real. Afterward, Dee Dee was none the wiser, but the taste of physical closeness had shifted something in Gypsy. The distance between fantasy and reality had shrunk. In the months that followed, their conversations took on a more urgent tone. Gypsy began to speak not just of escape, but of action. She floated the idea of running away together, but she knew Dee Dee would never allow it. Her mother had threatened to destroy her if she tried to leave, and without ID, money, or support, Gypsy believed she couldn't survive on her own. Then the idea changed. Gypsy later claimed that it was Nicholas who first suggested killing Dee Dee. Nicholas, in turn, insisted that Gypsy was the one who begged him to do it. The truth, as it often does in cases like this, remains blurred by fear, trauma, and hindsight. But what's certain is this. In their private world, shaped by control, longing, and secrecy, Gypsy and Nicholas began to view murder not as an unthinkable act, but as a form of liberation. Nicholas told Gypsy he would do anything for her, that he would protect her, that no one would hurt her again. And in her mind, warped by years of emotional manipulation, Gypsy began to believe that perhaps this was the only way out, the only path to freedom. They planned quietly, carefully. The date was chosen, the method discussed. Gypsy would leave the door unlocked. She would play the helpless daughter. He would become the dark prince who would end the story once and for all. And then she would be free. Not in a fantasy, not in a dream, but in the real world, where she could finally walk, speak, and live as herself. But freedom born from violence rarely brings peace, and what followed would reveal just how deeply the roots of abuse and desperation had grown. It was June 2015, and the house on West Volunteer Way was quiet. The neighborhood slept under a thick curtain of summer air, warm and still. Inside the pink-trimmed bungalow, where wind chimes hung silent on the porch, and garden gnomes smiled from the flower beds, Gypsy Rose and Dee Dee Blanchard were getting ready for bed. That day had passed like so many others: medications, meals, television. Dee Dee, as always, kept the routine intact. But Gypsy knew something different was coming. She had unlocked the front door, left it ajar. A small, simple gesture, but it marked the point of no return. She had given Nicholas directions, told him when to arrive, what to do, and what to bring. He came late that night, quietly, stepping into the home like a shadow crossing the threshold. The plan was that Gypsy would hide in the bathroom, not because she was afraid, she later said, but because she couldn't bear to see what was about to happen. She covered her ears. There was no screaming, no loud struggle. The act itself, according to reports, took place swiftly. Nicholas entered Dee Dee's room while she slept, a knife in hand, a heart full of twisted devotion. Gypsy remained tucked away, weeping into her hands, trembling behind the closed door. What precisely occurred in that bedroom, no one will ever fully know. But when it was over, Gypsy emerged to find the world forever changed. Dee Dee lay still. Her reign of control ended not by a slow unraveling of truth, but by a single, irreversible act of violence. Gypsy's emotions in that moment were complex, a swirl of grief, shock, guilt, and, in her own words, relief. Her mother was gone. The one person who had defined every breath of her life was now silent. The house felt strangely weightless, as if the tension that had filled every corner had lifted, leaving behind a space Gypsy hardly recognized. She and Nicholas cleaned up as best they could. They gathered Dee Dee's money, packed bags, and left. They traveled by bus across states toward Nicholas's home in Wisconsin. 2 lost children in the bodies of adults, carrying secrets too heavy for their shoulders. Gypsy had brought along the knife, the one used that night, and mailed it back to Nicholas's home address in a bizarre attempt to avoid carrying it across state lines. But in their hurry, in their inexperience, they left behind traces, a computer search history, video surveillance, and perhaps most damning of all, a Facebook post, posted from Dee Dee's shared account, a strange, jarring message. That video is dead. Asterisk. The message stunned the community. It seemed so far removed from the sweet, gentle images the public held of Dee Dee and Gypsy. Was it a hack, a cruel joke, or something more? Neighbors called police. Soon, officers arrived at the house. They knocked, peered through windows, found the door unlocked. Inside, they discovered Dee Dee's body and Gypsy. Gone. The search was swift. And 2 days later, authorities tracked Gypsy and Nicholas to Wisconsin. They were found staying with Nicholas's parents. The reunion, if it could be called that, was quiet. Gypsy did not resist. Nicholas seemed dazed. And thus, the fantasy of freedom ended not with celebration, but with arrest. The story that followed would unravel slowly, layer by layer, like fog lifting from a long-hidden truth. What began as a missing persons case soon became something far more complicated, because as the world looked closer, it realized something strange. Gypsy Rose could walk. She could speak clearly, eat solid food, laugh, think, live. The girl once seen as fragile and childlike was, in fact, a capable young woman in her early 20s. And Dee Dee, the mother once hailed as saintly, had left behind a trail of lies, manipulation, and medical deceit that stretched back over a decade. The crime was real. The act was undeniable. But the reasons, those would stir debate, sorrow, and confusion for years to come. And in the wake of that night, the world was left to ask, when a prisoner lashes out at their captor, who truly bears the blame? The first signs that something was wrong came not with sirens, but with silence. Friends and neighbors had noticed that the usually bustling Facebook page shared by Dee Dee and Gypsy had gone quiet, save for that one strange message. a message so vulgar, so out of character, it rattled everyone who read it. That big two is dead. Many assumed it had to be a hack, a cruel prank. But the unease lingered. Calls went unanswered. Texts were met with silence. And when no one saw Dee Dee or Gypsy in the days that followed, concern gave way to fear. Neighbors contacted the police. When officers arrived at the Blanchard home on June 14th, 2015, they found the house dark and still. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the air was heavy, unmoving. It didn't take long before they found Dee Dee, lying lifeless in her bed, under a pile of blankets. There were no immediate signs of a struggle elsewhere in the house. No sign of Gypsy. The wheelchair she always used, the one her mother said she couldn't live without, was still there. At first, investigators feared the worst. Had Gypsy been kidnapped? Was she in danger? The possibility of an abduction hovered over the scene like a cloud. But when detectives began to dig deeper, things quickly unraveled. They obtained search warrants for the Blanchards' devices, and there, tucked inside chat logs and browser history, was the story no one expected. Gypsy had been communicating with a man named Nicholas Godejohn extensively. Their messages painted a picture of a secret romance, a shared plan, and a dark resolution. Photos, conversations. Even the details of Dee Dee's murder had been discussed in advance. The digital trail led investigators directly to Nicholas's home in Big Bend, Wisconsin. On June 15, just one day after Dee Dee's body was discovered, police knocked on the door. Inside, they found Nicholas and Gypsy. The girl who had been presumed kidnapped was not only safe, she was walking. The revelation shocked everyone. In footage later released to the media, Gypsy looked small and quiet, her long hair down, no wheelchair in sight. She walked with hesitation, but she walked, unaided, unhindered, and entirely capable. It was the first time the world saw her not as a helpless child, but as something entirely more complicated. A young woman who'd been hiding in plain sight. News of the arrest spread quickly, and as reporters dug into the Blanchards' past, an astonishing truth emerged. Gypsy had never been as sick as her mother claimed. The long list of diagnoses, unverified or exaggerated. The feeding tube, unnecessary. The seizures, rare if they happened at all. Her real age, several years older than what Dee Dee had told others. What unfolded in the days that followed was not just the story of a murder, but the unraveling of a carefully crafted illusion. One built by Dee Dee Blanchard over many years with stunning success. Doctors who had treated Gypsy expressed disbelief. Charities who had supported the family were blindsided, and neighbors who had doted on them with affection now wrestled with feelings of betrayal and confusion. In the court of public opinion, lines were quickly drawn. Some saw Gypsy as a victim, a girl trapped in a life she didn't choose, manipulated from childhood, denied education, autonomy, even identity. Others struggled with the fact that she had helped orchestrate her mother's death, that she had not run away, that she had stayed in the house the night it happened, that she had smiled, posed for photos, and seemed at times eerily calm. But beneath the headlines and debate, one truth remained. For nearly her entire life, Gypsy Rose had been living a lie, one she did not choose, one she could not escape, and in the end, her path out of that life came at a devastating cost. As the legal system prepared to take over, the public braced for the strange next chapter of a story already too unbelievable to ignore. As the days turned to weeks, the truth, once carefully buried beneath sympathy and appearances, began to surface, one layer at a time. In interviews with police, Gypsy spoke softly. Her voice still carried the childlike tone she'd been conditioned to use, but her words were clear. She described the years of control, the isolation, the medications she didn't need, the wheelchair she didn't require. She spoke of the physical and emotional toll, the fear, the dependency, the moments when she tried to resist, and the punishment that followed. She didn't cry. She explained that she hadn't wanted her mother to die, but she hadn't seen another way to live. Nicholas, too, gave his account. His story painted a portrait of a deeply troubled man, one who blurred fantasy with reality. He admitted to the killing without hesitation, claimed he did it for love, said Gypsy had asked him to do it, that he would do it again if she wanted. Together, they were like children in overgrown bodies, not hardened criminals, but damaged souls, wrapped in a crime far larger than either could have fully understood. The public was transfixed. News outlets released footage of Gypsy walking. Court sketches showed her sitting upright, wearing prison garb instead of princess dresses. The image of the sickly, helpless girl was gone, replaced by someone far more complicated. And Dee Dee, she too, was re-examined. Journalists began uncovering her history, stories of past theft, strained family relationships, and a pattern of manipulation. Her stepmother accused her of poisoning her own mother with Roundup weed killer. Others claimed she had stolen checks, committed credit fraud, and alienated relatives who questioned her choices. In the wake of her death, even Dee Dee's own family expressed mixed emotions. Sorrow, yes, but also a kind of grim relief. Doctors came forward with notes of concern they had once quietly filed away. Friends recalled odd moments they had brushed off. Charity organizations were forced to reconcile the fact that they had been misled, not by a mistake, but by a masterful deception. Gypsy's attorney argued that she had been the victim of long-term abuse and that her role in the crime was inseparable from that trauma. Psychological evaluations supported this. Experts testified that she had been mentally and emotionally imprisoned, and that her actions stemmed from desperation, not cruelty. The case was unlike anything most had ever seen. There was no simple villain, no clear-cut victim, just layers of pain, survival, manipulation, and need, tangled in ways that defied easy categorization. And slowly, the justice system began its work. When Gypsy Rose entered the courtroom for her sentencing, the room fell silent. She walked to her seat with calm, deliberate steps, her long hair brushed over her shoulders. She wore glasses and prison beige. No wheelchair, no stuffed animals. Just a young woman, facing the weight of a lifetime in the balance. But justice, in this case, would not be handed down with the usual harshness. In 2016, as part of a plea deal, Gypsy Rose Blanchard pled guilty to second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison. The judge acknowledged the complexity of the case, the years of abuse, the emotional manipulation, the psychological damage. For many, the sentence felt gentle. For others, it was too much. But Gypsy accepted it quietly. She did not cry. She thanked the court. And then she was led away. Nicholas Godejohn's trial, which came later, was more rigid. He was charged with first-degree murder and armed criminal action. Unlike Gypsy, he did not take a plea. In 2018, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. An additional 25 years were added for the weapons charge. His courtroom demeanor was odd at times. Intense, disconnected, emotional. His defense attorneys argued diminished capacity, but the jury saw it differently. The verdict was final. Nicholas would not walk free again. Outside the courtroom, opinion remained divided. Was Gypsy a victim? A co-conspirator? Both? Could someone raised in a lie be expected to know how to seek the truth? Reporters and filmmakers descended on the case. Documentaries followed. Books were written. Dramatized series aired on television. The story of Gypsy Rose became something larger than itself. A symbol of invisible abuse, a cautionary tale, a quiet tragedy. But beneath the headlines, the real story remained, delicate, painful, and rooted in a child who had simply wanted to live her own life. And now, for the first time, she was. Today, Gypsy Rose Blanchard is no longer the girl in the wheelchair, no longer the soft-spoken miracle child who graced charity events in tiaras and pink dresses. She's a woman in her 30s, shaped by trauma, hardened by experience, and yet still searching for peace. Behind bars, Gypsy earned her GED. She took college classes. She gave interviews, not for attention, but to tell her story. And in those interviews, her voice changed. It grew stronger, clearer. Her sentences became more sure. She said she felt freer in prison than she ever did at home. That sentence, simple and startling, lingered in the minds of many. She began receiving letters from strangers, some supportive, others confused. Some saw her as an icon of survival. Others couldn't forgive the way her story ended. But Gypsy, for her part, did not try to justify the crime. She called it wrong. She called it sad. She said she would have done things differently if she had only known how. In late 2023, news broke that Gypsy would be released early for good behavior, nearly 3 years before her full sentence was set to end. And in early 2024, she stepped out into the world for the first time in nearly a decade. Her release sparked a renewed flurry of headlines, interviews, documentaries. But Gypsy's demeanor was different. Older, calmer. She wore simple clothes, answered questions with composure, and spoke often of wanting to live quietly, to build a future, to help others, to heal. Whether she finds that peace remains to be seen, but her journey, from illusion to clarity, from confinement to choice, is one of the strangest and most tragic ever told. And like all such stories, it ends not with answers, but with silence. As you drift now into stillness, remember this. Not all prisons are made of bars. Some are built from lies, from love twisted out of shape, from protection turned into control. Gypsy Rose was a girl who was never allowed to grow. And when she finally did, it came at a cost too great for anyone to bear. May we learn, softly, from stories like hers, not to judge too quickly, not to see only what we're told, and not to mistake obedience for peace. Sleep well, dear listener, and may your dreams be kinder than the lives we leave behind in the dark.